there, drone fans. Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I want to tackle a question of how can I fly my Mavic Pro with a set of FPV goggles. I've gotten that question from a lot of you guys over the last couple of weeks, and honestly, it's a wonderful question because I love flying FPV. If you've never done it, sliding a pair of FPV goggles on, launching a drone and flying it, it's a different experience. It's a very immersive experience, and it tricks your mind into thinking you're actually in the drone, flying the drone. So when you swoop down over a river or field or forest, it's just incredibly cool. It's almost like you're Superman flying down there, getting a good look at things. So a very, very cool thing to do. And it isn't that easy on the Mavic. Like with the Phantom 3 and Phantom 4, which I flew a lot through FPV, you can actually modify the controller with a new card from DJI for about 90 bucks that you could change the bottom card, put this new card on, and the new card had a direct HDMI output on it. So the video from that could drive like an external monitor. If you were flying with friends, they could all watch this big monitor. Or you could drive a set of FPV goggles like the Fat Shark, the dedicated goggles, or any brand of goggles really that took a direct video input from it. So it was pretty easy to set that up and fly, and I flew a lot with it, and I like it an awful lot. With the Mavic, it's a little bit more difficult because the Mavic, at this point, doesn't have a kit that does the same thing. Now, they may be working on one of those, and if they release it, that'll make it a lot easier. But in the meantime, really the only two connections you can make to the controller are this bottom USB connection and this side micro USB connection. So I thought to myself, could I figure out a way with tinkering with this thing to drive video directly out of the controller to a monitor or set of FPV goggles? So I love to experiment. So the first thing I did was connect up a micro USB to HDMI adapter, and then took that HDMI cable to an external monitor to see if I could drive video to the monitor. No dice, didn't work. So then I tried the full-size USB on the bottom with an HDMI adapter on that to try to drive the video as well. I had my fingers crossed, no dice. So what I've got now is a controller that can't directly drive video that I can figure out yet. I'm still going to experiment with it, but as of now, the only connections I can make, again, are the USB and micro USB, and I'm convinced that those are designed to connect directly to a phone or a tablet, so in conjunction with the phone and tablet, you can fly your drone. Now, I know DJI is releasing a set of FPV goggles that they've designed themselves that I think connect up to the drone through the OcuSync technology. So once those are released, I'll try and get my hands on a pair of those and review them. But for the time being, I want to fly FPV on this. So the only option I've got is to go to some type of external application with a set of VR goggles. Now, I've talked before about the Litchi app or the Litchi app. It's an application that runs on your phone or your tablet. It's sort of a competitor to the DJI Go app. It's got a lot of overlap in functions and features, but it's got a lot of other cool stuff that currently the DJI Go app doesn't have. So I use the Litchi app a lot for flying missions and for auto record and things like that. The one thing it's got for today's purposes, it's got a VR mode. So when you use that application, you can put it in VR mode, use it with a set of goggles, and fly FPV. Now, before I get into the connections and adjustments and all the settings, I want to talk a little bit about flying through first-person view. And these are rules that were set up by the FAA, and I've got some of my own suggestions too, because I've done a lot of flying around with FPV. So the first rule, which is probably the most important one, and again, this is for new pilots to the hobby, not people that have been around for a while, because you guys all know these rules, but I have to state it again because there's a lot of brand new people coming into the hobby, which is a wonderful thing, but the Mavic Pro may be their first drone and they don't quite understand the rules yet. So the first rule, which is most important, is you can't really fly FPV at all unless you have a spotter, because the FAA doesn't consider that first-person view from those goggles to be adequate. You have to have visual line of sight on your drone when you're flying. I know that's a bummer because you'd love to put the goggles on and fly, and it frustrates me that I see people doing videos with exactly that kind of behavior where they put the goggles on, launch the drone, fly it out 4 miles. That's a really risky proposition for a lot of different reasons. Number one, when you put these goggles on, it's such an immersive experience, but you lose all your peripheral vision, above, below, and both sides and behind you. So all you see is whatever field of view you have in front of you, which is great because you can see what's coming here, but you could elevate and hit a tree, you could hit a plane. There's a lot of dangerous things that can happen. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that when you're inside those goggles, again, you have no perspective around you, so the goggles, and you can turn on some of the features in the goggles that really take over controlling the drone. You may do something goofy with the goggles and cause the drone to fly off in a weird direction. So having a spotter keeping it on the drone is a really good thing. Plus, you're playing by the rules by doing that. So the first one is always have a spotter. Now, they may change that. The FAA is talking about having, first-person view be visual line of sight, and if that happens, wonderful. Then you can fly without a spotter. For me, when I go out and fly first-person view, where I'm using goggles, I'll bring a spotter, and it's boring for them, but what I'll tend to do is I'll fly a battery with the goggles, then I'll let them fly a battery, and I'll spot with the goggles. So we trade off back and forth, and that seems to work out pretty well, so everybody gets a chance to fly. The second rule is if you've never flown with this, or if you're just getting used to FPV, find a very wide open space without any kind of obstructions anywhere around you. Put the drone up to 100, 200 feet, find an open field or get near a beach or someplace where you couldn't really hit anything, because it is difficult, again, to judge the distance from objects. And because you're not using the controller for some of the modes that you're going to use in VR, you could turn your head quickly and the thing's going to take off and hit a tree. So find an area where you can get used to it and understand the timing and how it behaves before you take it into environments where you're around a house or around people or around buildings and things like that. The third thing I'll tell you is, if you've never used a VR set of goggles before and never done any kind of virtual reality or any kind of FPV flying, it's a different experience, because you're technically tricking your brain into thinking these two disparate images are now converged, and your brain puts itself in that visual. So all kinds of things can happen there. You can get dizzy, you can get headaches, you can get nauseous. So what I recommend is try it a little at a time. So maybe fly for a battery, take a break, get a glass of water, a can of soda, then get back into it if you feel better. And over time you'll get better with it, but that first entry into that immersive experience can be very disorienting. So take your time and get into it, because it is a lot of fun, but it does take some getting used to. I'd hate for you to do it, get sick or get a headache, and then say, I'm never going to do it again, because there's so much benefit to doing that. The last thing I'll say is that once you're in that immersive environment, your timing and the distance that you're looking at are off. So the distance to objects is different inside there than it would be out here where you're actually looking at the tree and the object. And the timing is off, because if you're looking at it, your visual reference, you see immediately what's going on with the drone, so you can react and you can fly it closer to things. When you're inside here, by the time the video gets back to the controller, gets transferred over to your phone, and you see it inside the headset, it's only microseconds, but that's enough sometimes if you're close to something where you can't adjust. So your adjustments are happening after the drone has already made the move in one direction. So just be aware, just like when they say in the rear view mirrors that objects may be closer than they appear, the timing and the distance are going to be different inside the goggles. Just something to be aware of, no big deal. All right, so what are you going to need to do this? So you need your Mavic, or you need any drone really. You need the Litchi app or the Litchi app. You can download that, get it on your phone, get it set up. Again, 20, 25 bucks, and you'll need a set of VR goggles. Now, I'm going to tell you, buy a cheap set. Don't start off with an $80 set or $90 set of goggles, because you don't know if you're going to like it, right? So buy a cheap set. You can use a set of Google Cardboard. They're virtually free nowadays. You can make them yourself off of plans on the internet. You can get them on Amazon, $4 or $5. But start with a cheap set, and then if you like it and you find yourself doing it a lot and you're really into it, then you can upgrade to a little more expensive set. If you want to get a more expensive set out of the gate, there's a few things you should know before you go out there buying them. So I'll give you some brief suggestions on maybe what to look for. So the two things you want to be careful of with VR goggles are, you want to make sure that these two adjustments are on them at a minimum. The first one has to do with what's called IPD, which is the inner pupillary distance, because everybody's eyes are not the same distance apart. So my eyes are here, your eyes may be a little wider, a little closer together. The lenses inside there that actually do that convergence of focus on those two images have to be right in front of your pupils. So the first adjustment has to be able to move those in and out. So that's on the top of this set over here. You're going to dial that in exactly right. Now, it could be off a little bit. You wouldn't even notice it. And that's when the headache starts. So you want to make sure you dial that in until it's a crystal clear picture. The other thing I like about these goggles is they also have a field of view adjustment. So how far the lenses are away from my eyes, because that way I can push them forward and sort of narrow my field of view a little bit, because I like to wear glasses when I have them on. Some of them have a fixed field of view and you can't move that around. So if they have that type of adjustment, that's kind of cool as well. The third thing I'll talk about, which is really important, is how the phone mates up with the actual goggles. In this case, these are Hamido goggles. They're great goggles. I love these. And I don't sell them. I'm not endorsing them. I'm just saying I love them. This flips down in the front. Some of the goggles don't have a flip down with a magnet or a spring. They actually have a cartridge that fits in from the side. You have to pop your phone in it and slide it back in the goggles. And that seems like it's okay, because why would I care? But the truth is, there's going to be a lot of adjustments on the phone. So with the Hamido goggles, they basically fly in like this. They click in. You can make whatever adjustments you have to your phone, then close them up and start flying. So it's a lot easier to pull it back down, make adjustments, track focus, whatever, then close them up again. If you have those cartridge styles, trust me, you're going to be pulling them out 2 or 3 times before you actually start flying. That's a pain in the neck, because you can't get at the controls once they're inside the goggles. So having the ability to flip it down and work on it is great. So those are really the only things you want to worry about. Now the connection to this is typically a pretty standard connection. Now, I talked about this cable in one of the other clips I did. I love this cable. Now, this is one thing we sell, so I'll put a link below if you decide you like this cable. But this cable is a universal 2-in-1 cable. It's got a USB connection on this end. It's got a lightning connection here from my phone. But if you pop this off, it's also got a micro USB connection. So this allows me to charge my controller from the road. It also allows me to make connection to an Android tablet or make connection to my iPhone product. So I'm using an iPhone today. So basically I make the connection to the iPhone here. Then I'm going to connect the USB up on the other side. So I make the connection, close it up. USB gets connected down the bottom here, and I'm off and flying. So then I start up the application, I make my adjustments, put them on my head, and that's my visual interface. Now I'm going to show you a couple of screens from the Litchi app just so you can see what are available to you and what adjustments you may have to make out there. So once you get the app, once you get the headset, you're ready to rock and roll. So the first screen you're going to see is the main screen from the Litchi app. Now that main screen is where all the adjustments are done. And if you were flying this without the FPV goggles on, just as a regular application, this is the screen you would interact with an awful lot. But if you look closely up in the upper right hand corner, there looks like a little icon that looks like a goggles. When you hit that, you're now in VR mode. And the minute you hit that, the screen splits into two images, and that's what you're looking at now. Now to look at those two images, you probably can't tell that they're slightly different, but they are a little bit offset of each other because they're going to actually converge using these lenses and the goggles onto each other to give you that really wide field of view. Now, the Hamido glasses have about 100-degree field of view, which is very, very wide. Some of them are a little more narrow, but that's determined by how these images look on the front. So having those two images split like that is really what this is all about. Now, below that, you'll see a couple of different parameters that are there. So that's the on-screen display, or the OSD. And those give you critical information about your drone. And you can turn that on or turn that off. I leave it on because I want to know what's going on with the drone. But just to give you a quick rundown on those, the A is altitude, how high it is off the ground. The distance is obviously how far the drone is away from the controller. The speed is the speed of the drone. Is it flying fast? Is it flying slow? The G kind of threw me. I had to look that one up. That's how many number of satellites I've connected to. So I guess G is for GPS. So right now I've connected to 14 satellites. The last one's the battery level, so 46% on the battery. So you have all the critical information you need to sort of know what's going on with your drone. Because remember, you're not looking at your controller. Once you put those goggles on, all you're seeing is that screen. So everything's got to be there to sort of keep track of your drone and make sure you're in a healthy place. The last thing on that screen that you want to pay attention to is that little kite at the bottom there, and that kite gives you an indication of which direction your drone is flying. So if the kite is facing straight up, the drone's flying away from you. If you spin it around so it's facing straight down, the drone's coming back to you. So give you a rough indication of how things are going with the drone out there. Alright, so there's a little set of gears down the bottom there, and those gears allow you to do some adjustments inside the actual application for what the VR functionality is. So when you hit those gears, this next screen pops up, and this is where you get to make some adjustments. So that first setting up there, the display OSD, that's your on-screen display. So I like to keep it on. A lot of people don't keep it on. They want to sort of, just have a clear view of their flight environments. I think that's a little dangerous because I really want to, I want to know what the drone's doing and how much battery life I've got left. And the key thing to remember is you can't get at this once you start flying, right? Because it's inside the goggles. So I turn that on. Then the OSD depth is, with that display, how deep into the picture that on-screen display is. So you can dial that to be in the center of the screen or back closer to the edge like it is here in this particular screen. But you can make adjustments to your preference there, no big deal. The next one is the gimbal head tracking. Now if you don't turn any of these advanced features on, all you're going to see inside that FPV goggle setup is the picture. You won't have any control over the drone. You'll fly it like you normally would. And again, it's kind of an unnerving experience to not see your hands. You're not actually looking at the controller, but you're going to fly it with the controller. This next one, the gimbal head tracking, if you turn that on, what that means now is when you put your head down, when you look down at the ground, you're going to control the gimbal inside the drone. So this is pretty cool because it's using the gyros inside your phone to actually know that you're laying your head down and the phone is heading more towards horizontal. It's going to move that gimbal down, which means as you're flying, if you look up, the camera's going to go up and you're going to track against that. If you look down at a particular object, it's going to track against that. So I turned that one on. I like that an awful lot. Just makes it way cooler because it's like, again, I'm in the drone looking down and flying. So that's pretty neat. The next one's the gimbal speed. What the gimbal speed determines is how quickly it moves down. Is it very responsive? When I put my head down, does it shoot down quickly? Does it go down slow? And you can play around with that and find an adjustment that's comfortable for you. Now the next section has to do with the head tracking for the aircraft. Now this is when it gets a little bit dicey, and this is a fairly new feature for them. So I have mine off because I did experiment with it and I actually crashed the drone because of it. And I'll explain that at the end of this clip, what happened there. But you have two choices if you turn it on. You have one that's called immersive and one that's called joystick. Immersive is the least violent, if there's a term for it, that you can turn on. When you turn on immersive, what that means is as you turn your head to the left, the drone's going to turn to the left. So imagine flying that drone, you're no longer controlling the spin of it from your controller, you're controlling it with your head. So that's where it gets a little bit, dangerous, because if you forget that and you turn quickly, the drone's going to turn quickly. So immersive allows you to, because the head tracking is on, the gimbal head tracking as well, you can look down and have the camera move down. If you turn on immersive and you turn to the left, the drone's going to slowly spin to the left, proportionate to the amount of spin you put in your neck there. So, and same to the right. So you can sort of scan back and forth with the drone as you're flying, which is pretty nice. The joystick mode is a little tough to get used to. I'll be honest with you. I played with it for a little bit and I didn't like it a bit. What the joystick mode does is very similar to the immersive mode. When you turn your head, the drone turns, but in the joystick mode, it keeps turning. So if I turn my head to the left a little bit, the drone's going to continue to spin to the left until I put my head straight again. So imagine your head is now the joystick. It takes some getting used to, and I don't know if I'd ever use that mode, but I did have the immersive mode on, and that's what got me in trouble in the backyard. I was actually flying back there, had the immersive mode on, and like a goofball, I finished flying, and I was going to bring the drone back in. The spotter had an eye on it, and all I did was go to take my phone out of the headset like this, and the minute I spun it, I forgot that the gyros in the phone are actually flying the drone now. So when I went like this, the drone came down, and the drone came down right into a tree and took out 2 of my propellers. So this is the first crash I've had with this Phantom 4, this Mavic Pro, and it was because of this headset, because like a goofball, I didn't remember that the phone is now controlling the drone, and flipping it down meant the drone's heading down and it crashed into a tree. The cool part was the Mavic kept flying, so I was able to land it even with that kind of damage on the blades. So this thing is a really cool drone. Anyway, don't do that, and that's why I'm saying if you're going to put this thing up, put it up in a wide open area so you've got plenty of area around you that you're not going to crash. Anyway, that's all I really had to talk about, and again, I'm going to spend some time probably going through comparisons of different headsets in another clip. I'm going to do another clip on the Litchi app, and probably 4 or 5 clips there talking about the different modes you can fly, the settings that are appropriate, and things like that. This clip I just wanted to get started and kind of explain how you can use the FPV function with the Mavic. So hopefully you find it helpful. If I find any other way to get video directly out of that controller, I'll definitely do an update to the clip. But in the meantime, if you guys have any questions about anything I talked about, you want any recommendations on any of this gear, let me know. I'll put a couple links below with some of the stuff I've talked about. I love doing these clips, like I say, every time, so if you guys are finding value in this, I'll continue to do them. The subscriber count is just growing by leaps and bounds. That's a very encouraging thing to me. That means you're passing these around, other people are finding the channel, and I'm getting a lot of good questions and comments from you as well, so keep that stuff up. Thumbs up are always good. Try and keep the thumbs down to a minimum. I'm trying to do the best I can to improve these clips every time I put one out, so hopefully they're getting better. And all I can do is thank you again for the support you guys have given me. Just really having a lot of fun doing these. So thanks again, have a good afternoon, and happy flying.